Tennis is one of the earliest games ever represented on a computer, and apart from a game of pool developed by William Brown and Ted Lewis on the University of Michigan's Midsack computer in 1954, which we'll go into another time, it was the first game to feature graphics updated in real time. Back in 1958, whilst working at Brookhaven National Laboratory, American physicist William Higginbotham discovered that the Donner Model 30 analog computer used in the lab could calculate ballistic missile trajectories. This wasn't particularly useful for the lab's research into peaceful atomic power uses, but it was useful for a public open day the lab held once a year. Higginbotham decided to use this functionality to form the foundation of a tennis game on a connected oscilloscope, displaying the path of a ball bouncing from one end of a court to the other. Using two rotational controls, visitors could interact with the display and, in effect, play the first video game instance of tennis. His hopes were to intrigue visitors and perhaps spike their curiosity for science. Higginbotham not only succeeded at this, but also at planting a seed that would go on to help forge the world of video games we know today. Fast forward just over a decade later, and we have something more familiar looking. Of course, we all know it as Pong, but actually Atari's Pong followed a simple game known as Tennis on the Magnavox Odyssey, the first home games console.
Circuit electronic playground. Odyssey is tennis.
A slew of what we'd call Pong machines during the 70s and early 80s galvanised this image in our minds. A basic tennis court, two bats and a square dot for a ball. Since then, of course, tennis games have come a long way, and given it's currently Wimbledon season, I know, check me out actually making a relevant topical video, I thought we could explore their evolution on consoles through the ages. Let's begin. The Magnavox Odyssey came with several pack-in cartridges. Although these cartridges didn't contain any actual data, they simply rewired the pin outputs to instigate a different screen output. But one of these carts produced this familiar tennis scene for us. Originally, overlays were provided to enhance the feel of the game, but strip that away and you get this output. Using two paddle controllers, two players could, for the first time, play virtual tennis in their homes, with little effort at all, although other than hitting back and forth, there are no rules. Fairchild's VES system would improve proceedings by adding actual programmable cartridges and colour. Released in November 1976, Tennis was supplied as an integrated game, along with a slight variation named Hockey. But it would take the Atari VCS to put tennis into the form we're more familiar with today, although this is still strictly an arcade-style game. Either playing with a friend or against the computer, you simply have to move your tennis player towards the ball, where a swing is automatically taken. It's fast-paced, but the simplicity and lack of challenge means matches can go on forever, leading to either boredom or a very sore wrist. RealSports Tennis presented a more realistic environment, adding court lines, scoring, most of the rules we expect, and more importantly, hit variation. Here we have a much more engaging game, however its control method is a little clunky. Rather than aiming with the joystick and swinging, here we have to use the numpad to set where the ball returns to, so top right would be 3, bottom left 7, and so on. If anything, this takes the tennis formula and overcomplicates it. Now here's one that should be familiar. Tennis was a launch title for the NES, having been released for the Famicom in 1984. Here we have an array of features including a Mario umpire, double matches, cooperative multiplayer, and configurable difficulty levels. Gameplay feels at home on the NES control pad, and Nintendo's now familiar style was already becoming evident. Naturally, Sega would have to follow with something similar for their Master System, and indeed the similarities are striking. Of course, we have the Master System's slightly wider colour palette and distinct PSG sound effects, but to a layman, these games will feel like the same experience. We even have an umpire, albeit on the other side and without that distinctive plumber moustache. I'm sure we'd even have Sonic in his place, if he'd existed at this point. So, from one Super Tennis to another, and we enter what I consider to be the most significant era for gaming, at least in terms of taking a game and making it feel like a compelling arcade experience. The Super Nintendo's abilities transform a sedate and somewhat lackluster outing into a more exciting and gripping extravaganza. Now we have a World Circuit mode offering 8 tournaments and providing a much more engaging and progressive experience. Thanks to the graphical abilities of the hardware, we even have sprites resembling the top players of the time, along with an excitement-inducing moving camera and some nice break sequences. Definitely one of the better tennis games. Now here's a game I spent many hours playing. However, it does highlight a problem with this flow of progression. Chronologically, we have progressed, but also we've regressed back to an 8-bit system. I've included it here because the advancement these underdog machines took in a world that was becoming dominated by 16-bit machines is admirable. I believe Andre Agassi Tennis is a testament to that underdog struggle. The controls aren't the best, but stick with it and you have a pretty playable and colourful game, with lots of options including changing up the court type as and when you feel. Yes, the early to mid-90s were a crazy time, especially in terms of gaming. New consoles were coming and going faster than John McEnroe descending into an argumentative rant. The CDI is one of those interesting products, very much aligned with that era. It offered us a seemingly impressive step up in graphics, but at the grisly fate of gameplay. International Tennis Open is no real exception, offering you something visually pretty close to a live action tennis match, with its CD-fed backgrounds and rotoscoped players, but with the playability of a Space Crusade set missing the dividing walls. You can make do, but it's just not as enjoyable. So we head back to the Super Nintendo seeking something fun and uplifting. David Crane's Amazing Tennis tries to deliver that goal to us, but with a distinctly low camera angle. You can tell that they were trying to make something visually impressive, something to stand out against other games, but actually it just hampers the enjoyment. You simply can't see enough of the court to play a decent game, and if I have the option to see my players back or the court, I'm going to side with the court. Wimbledon Championship Tennis on the Mega Drive therefore retains a more appropriate and familiar viewpoint. Graphically, we're not progressing at this point, in fact these visuals are close to Master System standard, but I've included it to show the undulation of change during this era. To be fair, the 16-bit consoles had a long lifespan, witnessing many tennis games, and this outing may be safe and lackluster, but it's still a playable experience. Interestingly, although it holds the Wimbledon name, we wouldn't get official player names until its sequel, ATP Tour Championship Tennis, the following year. Japan is our destination for Ace wo Nurai, derived from a manga series which translates to Aim for the Ace. Well. The series charts the story of a high school student seeking to become a professional tennis player, and it made its way onto the Super Famicom during December 1993. Now here we get a tennis game that really makes use of the Super Nintendo's rotational and sprite scaling effects. You can switch between a Mode 7 or standard view, but both offer a compelling game of tennis which arguably knocks the socks off anything we'd seen before. Alright, so here's one of the later games for the 16-bit machines. We've seen Agassi, now it was time for Sampras to step up. And although we don't have the Mode 7 features of our previous game, we do have some nice parallax scrolling, new shot types and the ability to play on indoor courts, if that's your thing. Codemasters have made some pretty incredible games, and Pete Sampras Tennis is no exception. Mean Machine's Sega noted that this could be the Mega Drive tennis game to beat the Super Nintendo's Super Tennis, created several years prior, and it certainly ticks a lot of boxes. So it feels about the right time to move on to the next console generation. We can ease in with Breakpoint Tennis on the Sega Saturn. Now, this is an era where in many ways the previous generation of graphics looked better. We may be entering the world of true 3D, which is no doubt impressive, but to counter that, the hardware was in its infancy and lacked features such as anti-aliasing. What we end up with is jagged edges and low-resolution sprites. A step in the right direction perhaps, but at this stage it feels a bit disjointed and murky. Actua Tennis on the PlayStation would move things along a bit more, although we're trading jagged edges for the PlayStation's renowned texture warping. Still, it provides a playable game if the court does seem eerily quiet at times. It's almost like the crowd have had the emotion sucked out of their warping craniums. Now here's one of my favourite Dreamcast games of all time. Actually, it's one of my favourite games of all time. Sega absolutely nailed it with VIRTUA Tennis, and it translates extremely well onto the Dreamcast's potent hardware. Everything here seemed so realistic to me. It even does today. From the smoothness of the graphics to the sound of the racket hitting the ball, everything is spot on. What's more, it's extremely compelling and simple to pick up and play, especially if you crack open the mini-games and 4-player doubles. So it's no surprise that VIRTUA Tennis 2 keeps up the momentum. It's with these games where you really realise that tennis can translate beautifully to a digital format. The simplicity of the early Pong games was something, but here we have an experience that mimics what we witnessed on TV, whilst adding a generous serving of entertainment. Importantly, VIRTUA Tennis 2 adds female characters whilst also improving the visuals. Over on the Xbox, however, new things were brewing, new graphics were emerging, and Topspin was there to capture them all. Here you get the complete tennis experience, from training with a coach to becoming the best player in the world. The Xbox visuals dazzled, whilst providing an engrossing experience depicted in real environments with real players. You only have to step onto centre court to see how this outing really shines. Let's switch over to the PlayStation 2 for Smash Court Tennis Pro Tournament 2, a series which takes most of its cues from VIRTUA Tennis, and manages to mostly pull it off in this second outing, mixed with a focus on precision which separates this from the faster-paced arcade excitement we knew with the former game. This feels like RealSports Tennis trying to pull away from the original VCS tennis in the 80s, just with several decades of graphical improvement. So it stands to reason that VIRTUA Tennis should pop up again, this time on the PlayStation 3. Now here's the generation where many considered the games moved from realistic to photorealistic. I know it doesn't seem like that now, but at the time it certainly did. We're now in the era where you can see a character and know exactly who they are. Even the animations are spot on. We've still got the VIRTUA Tennis arcade roots, but they've been built onto a fabric of real life which pushes the genre forward. So I skipped over the obvious Wii Sports Tennis, mainly due to its bubbly cartoon feel. I wanted to stick to the evolution of more realistic and serious tennis games, and so EA Sports Grand Slam Tennis fills in nicely. Taking advantage of the Wii motion controls, here was the tennis experience we all craved, brought to life. You can imagine in another few decades we'll all be playing tennis in VR, unable to differentiate it from the actual sport, and then maybe we'll ask ourselves what on earth we're actually all doing. By now, Topspin had reached its fourth outing on the inevitable Xbox 360, and along the way it's refined the things which made it good and made them better. This is a game which can cater to both those looking for a casual bit of arcade fun and the more serious player who wants to use precision shots to volley their way through tournaments. This game has loads of content, all benefiting from the 360's graphical ability and excellent control pad. And so, having intentionally missed out computers, because that's a whole world in itself, we move on to the current generation of consoles. AO International Tennis on the Xbox One fills a void, an absence of tennis games on the platform. It does it in pretty good fashion, bringing the format up to date, as does Tennis World Tour on the PS4, both games released in 2018, and both games making up for an apparent tennis hiatus during the previous 5 years. Of the two, AO International Tennis on the Xbox One is probably the best, with the most options and best gameplay. But playing these modern iterations with their complexity and high definition graphics just makes me yearn for something more pixely. Something simpler, something like Super Tennis on the Super Nintendo, because really somewhere between that and Virtua Tennis is where I believe the cream of tennis games reside, and I'm completely up for going back and playing them again. Who knows where the future of tennis games will take us? I mean, there's only so much you can do in a tennis game, but somehow I think we've already peaked. After all, progress doesn't always lead to more fun. But what I was saying earlier about virtual reality tennis, well, it looks like that's already here. I haven't played Dream Match Tennis on the PS4, but I think I'll give it a go. Thanks for watching. Have a great evening.